Hey everyone, welcome to part 3 of our Sailor Moon tutorial. This is the last part. Let's get started. Let's make her hair buns. And we'll need our yellow yarn to start. So we are going to start by making a magic ring with 5 single crochets. Next, we're going to do an increase round, and we're going to increase from 5 stitches to 10 stitches by increasing in every stitch. One, and in the same stitch, increase for 2. 3, and increase for 4. 5, and increase for 6, 7, and increase for 8, 9, and increase for 10. Next, we're going to do another increase round, and we're going to increase from 10 stitches to 15 stitches by increasing on every multiple of 3. 1, 2, and in the same stitch, increase for 3. 4, 5, and in the same stitch, increase for 6. Now repeat that pattern 3 more times until you have 15 stitches. Next, we're going to do another increase round, and we're going to increase from 15 to 20 stitches by increasing on every multiple of 4. Single crochet 1, 2, 3, and in the same stitch, increase for 4. 5, 6, 7, and in the same stitch, increase for 8. Now repeat that pattern 3 more times until you have 20 stitches. All right, next we're going to do 2 rounds where we just single crochet 1 in every stitch. So that's 2 rounds of 20 stitches or 40 stitches. And I'll meet you back here when that's all done. All right, so I'm at the end of my 2 rounds. Next, we're going to do a decrease round, and we're going to decrease from 20 stitches down to 15 stitches by decreasing on every multiple of 4. 1, 2, and then 3 and 4 are decreased together. 5, 6, and then 7 and 8 are decreased together. Now repeat that pattern 3 more times until you have 15 stitches. All right, so I'm at the end of my round. Next, we're going to do another decrease round, and we're going to decrease from 15 stitches down to 10 stitches by decreasing on every multiple of 3. 1, and then 2 and 3 are decreased together. 4, and then 5 and 6 are decreased together. Now repeat that pattern 3 more times until you have 10 stitches. All right, so we are all done, so you can slip stitch and chain 1 to finish off. And then you can take some toy stuffing or your yarn tail and stuff it. Okay, so that's the bun all done. You can rewind this video to make your second one. If you are all done, then we can move on. Let's make her barrettes, and you'll need your red yarn to start. We are going to make a magic ring with 5 single crochets. One, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Next, we're going to do an increase round, and we're going to increase from 5 stitches to 10 stitches by increasing in every stitch. 1, and in the same stitch, increase for 2. 3, and increase 4. 5, and increase 6. 7, and increase 8. 9, and increase for 10. So that's it. You can slip stitch and chain 1 to finish off. And then we are going to sew this piece onto the buns using a whip stitch. Once it's all sewn in place, you can thread your tapestry needle with some white yarn and create the white outline for her barrette using chain stitches. Just do a single row of chain stitches to outline her barrette. And that's her hair buns done. Let's sew them onto her head. Pin them on her head and play around with the arrangement until you find one that you like. Then, sew them in place using a whip stitch. Let's create the rest of her hair. Thread your needle with more yellow yarn. You're probably going to need to thread your needle with more yellow yarn several times throughout the course of this process. Using your yellow yarn, mark the center part for her hair by coming out in the center of her forehead where her hairline starts and bringing the yarn all the way back to the center of the back of her neck where her hairline ends, going straight down the center of her head. Then repeat that process, moving from the buns to the center line so that it looks like her hair is being pulled into the buns. Repeat this process until her entire head is covered. To make this process move along faster, you can thread your needle with a double strand of yarn. Just make sure that the strands don't get twisted as you're sewing. As you're creating each individual strand of hair, measure along the strand that you just sewed to make sure it lines up. That'll ensure you get the entire scalp covered without needing to go back and repeat several stitches. It may also be helpful for you to mark where her hairline starts and ends using a marker. So going along her forehead where her hairline would start, then behind the ears and down to the back of the neck, just to mark where her hair starts and her face begins. I didn't do that, but I wish I would have done that in this case. Once you have the scalp completely covered in yarn, we can move on. Let's make her bangs. Cut several short pieces about 2 to 4 inches long of your yellow yarn. Then we're going to use a latching technique to attach them to her hairline where her fringe should go. You put your hook in through one stitch and then come out in the stitch next to it. Fold your yarn in half and put the loop on your hook. Then pull through the stitch on the body and pull both ends through the loop on your hook. That's how you can latch on the pieces to create her fringe. So latch on several pieces. You'll probably have to do 2 to 3 rows of latched pieces all along the front hairline to get enough on there to create thick enough bangs. Next, take your prep brush and brush out the bangs. They're not going to look very good. They're going to look really fluffy and weird, kind of like a poodle, but they'll come together in the end. Then if they're too long, cut off any excess. Be careful as you're cutting it off because you can always cut off a little more, but you can't add any back on. So if you cut them too short, they're just going to be too short. Once you've got the bangs at your desired length, heat up whatever heat tool you're using on a low setting and then iron out the bangs. You want it on a low setting so that it's just hot enough to smooth them out, but not so hot that it melts the yarn. Once you've got them all smoothed out, you can go back in with your scissors and cut off any uneven ends, and then we can move on. Next, we can create her pigtails by threading our tapestry needle with more yellow yarn, then going into the base of the buns. This is very important, the base of the buns, not the top of the buns, and create some long loops with our yarn. So we bring the yarn out and then go back into the base of the bun, leaving a long tail of yarn. So it should measure longer than her body. Then go back in and create another loop and make sure all of the loops are about the same length. And do this about 4 or 5 times. You want the pigtails to be thick, but not too thick. So they're supposed to look long and ribbon-like, so not thin and scraggly, but also not super thick. Once you've got your desired number of loops, you can take your tapestry needle and kind of break through all the loops that you created in the base and then kind of secure them down into the bun. So you're going to use your tapestry needle to kind of help secure them in place. That way when we brush them out, they won't come out, because the last thing we want is for them to just completely come out of the bun when we go to brush it. Once you've got them secured in place, you can cut the loops so that they're individual strands of yarn. And then we're going to take our pet brush and brush it out, just like we did with the bangs. Once it's all brushed out, you can take your heat tool and smooth it out, just like we did with the bangs. And now her hair is done. Let's sew on all the different parts, starting with the legs. So thread your tapestry needle with your cream yarn, and the first thing we're going to do is sew the top of the leg closed. Now, if you want your Sailor Moon doll in a permanently sitting position, like if you lift it up, the legs will stay in a seated position, then you can skip this step. However, if you want the legs to come down into a standing position when you lift up the doll, sew the top shut so that it can have kind of a thin join on the body. Then sew the legs in place parallel with the eyes. And I'm sewing the legs so that they don't quite follow the round pattern of the body. So they span across a couple rounds, but they're not exactly sewn facing forward. But just sew them on using a whip stitch. As you can see, they flop down when she stands up. Next, let's sew on her arms. And her arms are really easy to sew on. Just sew them on at the base of the neck using a whip stitch. Let's sew on her collar, and once again we're going to sew this on using a whip stitch, but for the collar only sew along the inner perimeter, the part that's wrapped around her neck. Don't sew along the outer flap because we want it to be loose like a sailor flap. Next, let's sew on her skirt. And once again, we are going to sew it on using a whip stitch. So you can wiggle it up to her body, and you can pin it in place if you like, but it's not really necessary. Next, create the border of her skirt using a single row of white chain stitches. So thread your tapestry needle with your white yarn and do a single row of white chain stitches just over the top of where you sewed the skirt onto the body. The last thing we need to do is sew the bows onto the body. You can do this using a whip stitch, but this one is going to be kind of a little bit difficult to sew in place just because it's so small. So what I did was I used a series of whip stitches in the center of the bow, and then I did a single stitch on all four corners of the bow to prevent them from curling over. So do that for both of the bows, and then we'll be done. So this is it. This is our finished Sailor Moon. Let me know in the comments below how you did. If you like this video, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. If you're interested in seeing what else I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram. If you're interested in learning more about my life here in Japan, you can check out my other channel, which is my J-Vlog, to learn all about what it's like living in Japan. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.